Welcome to the Happy Mama Movement podcast. I'm Amy Taylor-Kabbaz. I would like to start by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on which this podcast is recorded as the traditional custodians of this land, and pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. And as this podcast is dedicated to the wisdom and knowledge of motherhood, I would like to acknowledge the mothers of this land, the elders, their wisdom, their knowing, and my own elders and teachers. Welcome back, everybody. How often do we hear the idea of self-care being given as an answer for an exhausted new mama? Over and over again, we are told that one of the answers to how she's feeling, whether it's burnt out, disconnected, anxious, is that she needs to look after herself better. And it frustrates me so much because actually what that mama really needs is a village. She needs a cultural shift in the way that she is supported and valued and seen in this time of her life. And yes, then she may be able to do things for herself. But in reality, the cultural shift may take some time. And in the meantime, what can we do when we are feeling so disconnected, when we're burnt out, when we feel like we've lost ourselves in those early months and even years? That's what I wanted to talk to Regan Figg about. Regan's new book, A Mother's Pleasure, really takes this idea of self-care and pleasure and looks at how we can realistically do this for ourselves in the early months and years of motherhood. Please know this isn't just another hashtag self-care conversation. We really look at what pleasure may be for you in this time of your life and how you can cultivate it as we wait for the cultural shift to kick in. Enjoy. Regan, welcome to the Happy Mama Movement podcast. This has been a long time coming. All good things are worth waiting for. So thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me here.
I love that you said it's a pleasure because obviously that's what we're here to talk about today. Your book, A Mother's Pleasure, and your own personal experience of navigating matrescence and motherhood and how you have healed and really found yourself again through this idea of pleasure. So let's start at the beginning. In previous conversations with you, I understand that this interest in pleasure and the feminine has been there from a very early age for you.
Yes, you're right in saying that. So I realized that when I was younger, because I thought maybe pleasure just became a random thing that I used as like a tool to help with that sort of healing after becoming a mama. And then I realized, there was kind of like a bit of a joke in our family from when I was a really little girl, like, oh, it's Regan. If it feels good, do it, And that was like, it looked like me as a toddler rolling around in mud if I wanted to, or, just being really connected with what made me come alive, with what felt good, with pleasure. And then flicking through my bookshelf the other day, I pulled out one of my favorite books, and it was a book I got in my early teens, and it's called Pleasure, an Almanac for the Heart by Nikki Gamel. And I was like, isn't that interesting? When you kind of look back and you're like, oh, actually, this has been it's been quite a core thread for me my whole life. And so, after I became a mum, well, even before I became a mum, when I was pregnant, I felt so confident stepping into motherhood. I was an exercise physiologist, a yoga and meditation teacher. I'd been a professional dancer. I'd always had this great connection with my body and a really good positive outlook. I was always the eternal optimist. So I was really surprised then after a few months in, I ended up being diagnosed with postnatal depression and anxiety and insomnia. And yeah, so for me, what the kind of journey with pleasure from there looked like was just, and I say just because it's kind of simple, but it's sometimes not so easy. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was learning to know and own and embrace like my desires and what brought me pleasure. And I just want to, I suppose, preface what I mean when I say pleasure, because I know there's probably a lot of mums that see the word pleasure and they think that's not for me, because they relate it to sex and sexuality. And sometimes, a lot of the time, when we're stepping into and through matrescence, that can be one of the things that we're not interested in, not ready for yet, looks completely different. So yeah, when I talk about pleasure, I'm not just talking about sex or sexuality. I'm talking about what makes me feel alive, what feels glorious, what is beautiful to witness and see, what I, sounds and music that I love to hear. It's connecting with sensuality. It is joy and fun and play, all of those things. So yeah.
Yes, I love that proviso, because I think that is immediately what we think about is pleasure is attached to sexuality or sex. And I love that you have acknowledged that, yes, while that is important, and I think is actually something that we as women do need to explore and understand post babies, it is often in that very early period, not where you start with exploring this, isn't it? It's not like, okay, so I really feel like I've lost myself. I've found myself either with postnatal depression or anxiety, or just depletion, disconnection, burnout. And so from going there to, okay, let's ramp up the sex life again, might not be the first place to start. So for you, in that post anxiety and depression stage, in those early days when you're just starting to move out of that space, what were the first steps of pleasure?
Yeah, what a great question. What that was for me was things that were accessible in small amounts of time and also available to experience whilst I was with my son. That no longer looked for me like a 90-minute yoga class, because that's what feels good. Mind you, I would have loved that, but it wasn't really possible or accessible. And it looked like laying down under the tree, reading a book. It looked like looking up at the clouds or at the stars with my little one. It looked like walks in beautiful areas, and maybe the babe was in his carrier or in the pram. It looked like, drives to get Bub asleep and then reading a book that was a novel while he napped, not doing the grocery list or the online, whatever it was that I needed to, like offering myself an opportunity to relearn and reclaim what felt good for me.
I love that word, reclaim, is one of my favorites, because I think everything you've just listed there, it really is about pleasurable for you and only you. And so much of that early time can be enjoyable. Like there are moments of joy when you're playing with your son, or there's things that can be enjoyable, but it's not directly heart and soul filling just for you. And, I love that you point out again that when you have the baby asleep in the back of the car and you sit there with the book, let it be a novel, let it be a book for you. Don't let it, try not to make it about, how to start solids for your baby and how to do these things, because it's about trying to find that place inside of you again after matrescence.
Yeah, exactly. And I think too, part of it, I did start to kind of play with the kind of prioritizing self-care piece, but I discovered that self-care, like that traditional idea of self-care, didn't actually fit with what brought me pleasure all the time or what I desired. Sometimes when I hadn't felt like I'd been able to accomplish, in inverted commas, anything all day, it actually felt really good to clean out the baby clothes or, have a good scrub at the kitchen. It was because the intention behind it was something that I desired and I chose. And other times I would look at the kitchen and ignore what was there and take a nap or listen to a yoga nidra or a funny podcast, because that's what felt good. That's what I desired. So yeah, it was less about, me time that had to look like a certain way, whether that be resting or getting my nails done, and also self-care that didn't have to be by myself. Like, it didn't have to be me time. Because I think sometimes that's the struggle too of, well, like, I'm aware that I would feel so much better if I could offer myself things that were pleasurable to me and offer myself things that look more and feel like more like self-love and self-care for me. But we can have this skewed idea that needs to look like adding more to the to-do list, like booking a massage appointment that, you might be laying there thinking of a million things because you kind of forced yourself to have that appointment, or like getting the nails done or being by yourself. Because sometimes, and I've really learned to embrace this too, like I actually spend a lot of time with my little ones. And for me, actually, the pleasure piece and the self-care piece sometimes actually looks like declining social invitations or time that perhaps would look like traditional self-care, because I actually want to honor what it is I truly want in that moment. And that looks different moment to moment, day to day.
What if someone doesn't know what they want or need in that moment? What if they're listening going, I don't even know what would feel good for me right now?
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up. That's the practice, that is the practice. And, as we're all listening to, in this podcast, people listening to this are very well aware of, like, when you talk of matrescence and that whole journey, that is such a big transition that because we do change so much, of course, we should probably expect that we won't be the same people. We might not enjoy the same things anymore. So I looked at it as a bit of an experiment, a bit of play. I got curious. I'm like, do I feel like doing this? Like, I used to like this. Do I still like that? Or, just really tuning in with, what if I could do anything right now, what would it be? And the kind of curious question of, well, if I knew what I wanted, what might that look like? Because I feel like sometimes we do have the answers, and it's just getting curious and having a bit of a play and a bit of trial and error. That can be really helpful. And the other piece there is bringing that connection back to your body, and I think particularly as mamas, we are operating from the neck up we are like thinking about the schedules, like the nap schedules, where are the shoes? We've got to organize this, that, and whatever in this tiny little window of time. And then, we're managing and we're negotiating and we're peacekeeping and doing all that kind of stuff. So it can be in that very masculine energy, that very do energy, which is all in the head, right? So whilst I couldn't do a 90-minute yoga class very, very often, I could ask my body, like, do I actually feel like eggs for breakfast this morning, or just maybe some yogurt? Do I want to go to that play date today, or do I feel like kind of hanging home and pottering around? Using my body, this is a practice that I got from Deidre Light, and it was using your body as a pendulum, of listening when it's moving forward and noticing that forward motion rather than moving back. So it's like, well, do I want eggs on toast, or do I want peanut butter? Do I want eggs on toast? And if I felt myself kind of leaning towards that, that was my yes. And so that, I've called that, and I share that in my book. It's called Know Your Yes No. Like, asking your body what does it want? Does it want this? Does it want that? Yes or no? And like improving that communication pathway with your body. So
it's so interesting. My mum does this, Regan. It's so funny. My mum, this is where I get all of my spirituality from. I was brought up with a total, hippies, baby boomer mum who took me to see and listen to Louise Hay when I was like 12 years old, or maybe even younger. And we laugh at her, but she does this, and she wouldn't mind that I'm sharing this, but she stands there and we'll ask her, Mum, do you want to do this? And she'll go, if you're just listening to the audio right now and not looking at the video, I'm rocking back and forth. So she kind of checks in with her body, and then we'll go and lean right forward and go, yes, that's for me today. And we laugh at her so much. And then the more I learn about this, the more I realize how wise she is.
Yeah.
And also how we should all be doing this, of checking in. She'll literally stand in a restaurant and be like, and checking in with herself. But what I've learned from her, and what you've just reinforced, is that we do have this internal guidance system. We absolutely do. It's something we need to practice, even if you do it quietly and maybe not so obviously as my mother. But we have to practice it, because the disconnection between our head and our body is so intense for so many of us. This is something we haven't been able to do. We haven't even been taught. And so is that just the way to start, is just to begin to try and remember to stop and feel what your body is doing in that moment?
Yeah. And I would even suggest like what I would describe as a sensuality practice. And some people sort of see that more as mindfulness, but having any kind of experience where you are noticing like what you're feeling, what you're seeing. Now, I don't typically suggest we do this in terms of like the whole 5 senses, like go through them all as a checklist. But for me, that looks like a completely different experience of the same scenario sometimes. So what I mean by that is, say I'm driving the kids to somewhere and we're running late. I might jump in the car and get my seatbelt on, and they're kind of in the car and my shoulders are up to my ears and I'm just focused on getting to the goal, and I'm not noticing what's going on. I'm not even noticing how I get from A to B, and I'm flustered, and even just now, like, I need to take a deep breath, Or I sit in the car, and whilst I'm still putting on my seatbelt and still moving through the motions, I'm noticing the seat actually supporting me and feeling myself supported in the seat. I'm noticing that when I'm, using the steering wheel, I'm feeling that slide between my hands. I'm having a look out. Maybe it's jacaranda season and there's some beautiful flowers around. Maybe it's a glorious sunny day, and instead of kind of being at the traffic lights at a red light, being stressed, I'm noticing the sun on my face and how nice that feels. So chances are we get from A to B, we get to wherever we're going at the same kind of time, but it's a whole different experience. So that kind of practice of sensuality connects us with our body, because it sensitizes our senses. It gives us that feedback. And so whilst we might not be curious about what feels good all day long, we're actually going to become aware that, I really love it when I can just sit and enjoy my morning coffee. It tastes so good. You really relish that experience, and that's where you find the pleasure, because the pleasure is in the present moment. And so when we can get present and connect with our body, not only do we enhance our ability to know what it is that feels good and what brings us pleasure and what we desire, it also, that act in itself, we're able to extract the pleasure from that moment. Win-win.
Win-win. Absolutely. Yeah. I also love the practice of if we're with our kids all the time, or at least most of the time, and are feeling like these focuses are something we have to wait for. I mean, you've just used a beautiful example in the car, but and this is no surprise to everyone listening, because we hear this suggested all the time, but we don't often remember to do it. It's like actually feeling their little chubby hand in yours as you walk down the street. That is one of my favorite things in the world. My youngest is 9. He's still holding my hand, and I feel like it's going to finish any second now. Yeah. But that, I am still, after all these years, surprised at the impact that has on my nervous system when I notice his hand in mine. Suddenly that rushing energy, I'm in my head, I'm thinking, I've got to get home, I've got that podcast interview, I forgot to do that thing yesterday, and suddenly, and it's using my eyes, my senses, and connecting with my heart. Yeah. It's so frustrating, Regan, in the sense that we hear these things so often, and they sound too easy. And something like that wouldn't make any difference to how stressed and overwhelmed or anxious I am right now. And therefore, we kind of don't prioritize it or remember. But it is really these small shifts that then, before you know it, you end up having a whole book written about pleasure. Or in my case, you've changed your career completely. They start with these tiny little things, like tasting your cup of tea when you drink it. Can we just reflect on what this beginning for you has now led into? Because that's what I want everyone to hear. These tiny things we do create this momentum, and before we know it, we are living very differently.
Yeah, exactly right. And a piece to add on there is not only just do we have these kind of little pleasures and then we can build on that, but the little pleasures, they open us up to what we believe we are worthy of.
Oh, that's good.
You know? Yeah. And so sometimes it's not that we've forgotten or we think we don't have time. I mean, they might be kind of the surface, I don't want to say excuses, but the surface reasons why we feel that we can't do that. What's below the surface is thoughts and beliefs, and often very unconscious, that I haven't earned it. I haven't been productive enough. What have I given? You know, I can't receive support and help and kindness right now because I didn't earn that, you know? The conversation around, like, well, what am I worthy of? So when we start small, it can feel uncomfortable to start because it's like, oh, am I actually allowed to tell my kids, sorry, just wait, I'm not going to help you with that for 2 minutes, I'm just going to finish my cup of tea. What comes up then? An example I used in the book was going for lunch with some friends. Gosh, I so wanted to go for lunch with my girlfriends. And it came time to leave and go out the front door. And I got that icky feeling of, like, you know, call it mum guilt, call it, you know, your little one just saying, Mom, I don't want you to go. Of course, everyone's staying out with me all the time, right, kids? But yeah, and it's that like, the pleasure is the tool that takes us to those moments to redefine what it is that we believe we're worthy of. It brings us to this consciousness because our body feels uncomfortable, and it brings us to this consciousness of, hey, is that okay for me to have some pleasure in my life? And when we go, you know what, actually it is. And it's not because I deserve it or I'm entitled to it or any of that. It's because I'm human. You know, it's my birthright. And this is my life. And chances are mums have probably wanted to be mums for so long, and now they get that opportunity. Like, let's enjoy it. And that doesn't have to look like the me time or the going out for lunch with friends. Yeah, it can look like deciding, like, sorry, kids, we're not going to go to the skate park today. I'm going to take you to the beach because that's what I'd really love to do. And we're going to have a good time there too.
Oh, that's an interesting example you dropped in at the end, because that's the way I heard you say that is you're prioritizing that you would like to be at the beach today, and they wanted to go to the skate park. And, you know, I've been in that situation where I've wanted to slightly tweak the plans over this way, and to hold that intention within yourself and clearly communicate that with them about that. That's again, that's another moment in motherhood of showing them that it doesn't always have to be just about them, but also my needs need to be met as well. And I love the way you said right at the end, and we're still going to have a good time.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you know what, I matter too. And it's not in a way of resentment or I've done this for you and now we're going to do this for me because I matter too. It's like, I matter too, you know, and I'm modeling that to my kids.
That's it. And that's so important for them to see that. Again, we hear that all the time, but if we can show our kids that it's okay to do what feels good and to ask for what feels good for you today, then that's a really powerful lesson for them to be walking into adulthood with.
Mm. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. Thank you. Like I said, I think these are conversations we often hear about when we talk about self-care and making sure that you look after yourself too, mama, and sleep when the baby sleeps and all of those things, but they don't break through.
Yeah.
I often find, because it feels like it needs to be more on the to-do list, and it feels like we have to have the house clean first.
Yeah.
So your book and this conversation, I hope, has really cemented how this can be done in small ways right now and the impact that that has, and to live a pleasurable life.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Regan. So glad. We've been trying to have this conversation for a while, so I'm so glad we got there. I really appreciate your perseverance.
Oh, thank you for having me. No, it's like, I mean, what would we prefer pleasure-wise? We don't need it to be like hard and fast and goal-oriented. Let's have a slow build.
Let's wait until it feels good and I can see you clearly on the video with the other problems we were having. Exactly. Yeah. Trust that it will come when it's time and will be good when it gets here. I'll put all the details about your work and your book in the show notes, but thank you for putting it out there into the world.
Oh, thank you. I'm deeply honored to be here. So thank you so much. I've had such a great time with you.
Thank you. Like I said right at the beginning, I wish we had a different system in place. So a mother looking after herself, exploring who she is now she is a mama, would come so much more easily because she would be surrounded by a village. Our culture would recognize what she truly needed. But for now, I hope that you found some inspiration, some ideas in this conversation with Regan. And please know you are so worthy of this. It is an investment in you as a woman, but also as a mother, because we cannot ignore this part of ourselves during matrescence. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. Please share this podcast far and wide. Until next week, Sat Nam.